Thanks for tuning in to the Mission Matters podcast, where we feature successful, mission-driven leaders committed to creating a positive change in the world. Our mission with this channel is to inspire other leaders by providing industry insights, new ideas, and inspiring stories from the pros.
All right, Paul Fife here, host of the show where I interview business leaders heading up mission-focused organizations, always leading from the heart and making a difference in our communities. You know, I actually say from the heart, but sometimes it's with our mind. Maybe today we'll find out what that really means too. Today's episode is sponsored by Gregory Media, long-established digital marketing agency devoted to nonprofit and mission-based organizations. Also one of a few thousand B Corps in the world. To learn more about B Corps and Gregory Media, visit paulgregorymedia.com. Excited about today's episode. Rick Lochner is the president and CEO of RPC Leadership Associates, and he is an accomplished coach, facilitator, keynote and workshop speaker, author of 7 books, and foremost leader. His vision is to help nonprofit leaders, business owners, corporate leadership, teams, and individual professionals make leadership a way of life. Thanks for being here, Rick.
My pleasure, Paul. My pleasure.
Now, I've known you for, I think, I was trying to count 14 or 15 years now, since I joined the chamber.
Probably 15 years, yeah.
I know we've served.
I met. Yeah.
And I know we've served on some boards together, or at least the chamber that I know of. Mm-hmm. And we travel in some of the same nonprofit circles. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, as you said in the intro, leadership is really the core of what I do. And, you know, it goes back to, graduating from the military academy at West Point, which is by most accounts, one of the premier leadership development educations in the country, as the military academies are. And so my leadership muscles have been exercised through 11 years in the military, 13 years in the corporate world at Sprint, a couple of years in a nonprofit, fast-growing startup business, and then even went so far as to transfer 26 years of telecom experience into my last couple of years in corporate and healthcare. So, at the core of all of that, it's I'm a leader, and leadership has always been the core of who I am. And so my charter here, my crusade, if you will, is to help people be leaders. Hence the vision of making leadership a way of life, rather than simply doing leadership. Getting past the idea that I can just do leadership by reading a book or using a checklist or using a process. You have to have that, at least in 21st century leadership, it's helping people embrace an attitude of leadership so that it becomes who they are, not just what they do.
Yeah. And I read something, probably on your website, that, leadership is doing. And when you went from the military to apply for Sprint, I guess it was, and it didn't really go well because they weren't sure with the military background if you were going to be able to ebb and flow with the variability of the business.
Right.
Taking that challenge on and saying, oh, well, just watch me in 26 years later. Actually, it wasn't even that. That's how long you were with the company, but you end up being VP of their...
Well, I went from a project manager to an area vice president running an $800 million business unit in 8.5 years. And for anybody that's out there listening that has been in the corporate world at all, that is almost unheard of.
Right.
To advance that far, that fast in a large... Sprint, arguably at the time, was a Fortune 100 company. And people have asked me hundreds of times, how did that happen? And it was really translating that military background to running to the sound of the guns, as the saying goes, instead of running away from the problem. And it was just noticed. It was noticed by the right people at the right time, and being able to recognize that leadership carries the day, regardless of what type of business you're in, for-profit, nonprofit, large company, small company. Leadership will ultimately carry the day.
I'm trying to figure out, for the benefit of our listeners, is this something that is learned? Because I know some of that military experience brought to bear on everything in your life. There's no challenge that you weren't able to overcome. But how much of that is individual talent?
Well, it's funny. I get that question a lot. How much is nature? How much is nurture?
Right.
And I always split the difference and go 50-50, right? Because we are products of just who we are, right? I mean, unless you're Muggsy Bogues or Spud Webb, if you're 5'6", your NBA career is kind of dead on arrival. So your basketball career. So those are the only two folks who have ever been 5'6" and had careers in the National Basketball Association. So there is some, left and right boundary to the nature part of it, but nurture is what you do within that left and right boundary. There are plenty of people who have PhDs that are not contributing to society. There are plenty of people who don't have high school diplomas that are contributing to society in a mighty way. So leadership is everybody, all of us have leadership potential. That is a given. That's been proven time and time again. It really boils down to whether we make the right choices to both learn how to, and then at the moment of contact, make the decision to exercise that leadership. So, for instance, I'm in the attitude adjustment business. So for me, it's all about attitude, because once we start thinking differently, we start doing differently. And I've had prospects tell me, well, you can't change my attitude. And I say, well, you're half right, because the half that I can control is I can teach you, how to do it. The other half that you control is whether you do it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So everybody can learn how to become a better leader within what nature gave us.
Sure. So there's some skill sets that can be learned if somebody actually go through it the way. So as a business leader and coach, how did you end up with nonprofits as part of your business model? I know I heard you talk a little bit about some nonprofit experience early on.
Yeah, it really goes back to before we started this leadership practice, leadership and coaching practice. I remember going back to a couple of years prior. I was interested in getting into nonprofits. I knew that my corporate career was winding down, and I was really looking for some opportunities to volunteer, as I had done a couple of times in the past. And I remember nonprofit leaders look at me in the eye and saying, Rick, you business people just don't get us. We're different. We're unique. You just don't understand. And so in 2006, I joined the Literacy DuPage Board, which is a local adult literacy nonprofit here in DuPage County, Illinois. And 2007, I was the vice president of the board. 2008, I became the president of the board, a position that I held for the next 6 years. And if you remember what was going on during that time, the recession was in full force here in Illinois. The Governor Rauner, his administration was really hammering on a lot of funding for nonprofits. And so when all was said and done, both at Literacy DuPage, where we ended up having a record year, and I'll go into that a little bit later, but those that survived those situations got the memo that, yes, they are a business. They're just a business with a special tax status. And so, yes, nonprofits may speak a different language, programs development versus operations and sales. But at the end of the day, they're a business and they need to operate like a business. And so when I saw the passion for wanting to learn how to run their businesses more effectively, and the lessons I learned from being the president of the board for Literacy DuPage through that period of time, I said, nonprofits are a force to be reckoned with. Obviously, they're doing great work. And so I want to be part of helping grow that passion. If only we had more of the business acumen that for-profit leaders have in the nonprofit space in exchange for all the passion that nonprofit leaders have, bringing that into the for-profit space.
You can move mountains, right?
We could. There would be nothing we couldn't do.
Yeah. So So that's a lot of maybe leaders in the nonprofit space, is what you're saying, may not have that mindset that, hey, this is supposed to be run like a business, and
Right.
You might be using different words and terminology, but at the end of the day, it's got to be run like any other business, with just a different tax status. And so you kind of see that gap in nonprofits, and you just thought, hey, wouldn't it be great to help these leaders as well? And the added bonus is you feel great because they're helping an organization that actually does good in the world.
Absolutely.
Fills a need.
Because I often get asked, as a lot of folks do when they're in a networking event, for instance, the question is always, well, what kind of people do you work with? And of course, the answer they're looking for is, I work with these kinds of business in this industry, this size company, this much revenue, blah, blah, blah.
Right. What's your niche?
My answer is always, I'll work with any leader that's got the right attitude, that recognizes they're good at what they do, but they could be better. And whether they're a for-profit, nonprofit, small business, large business, that's who I'm willing to work with. And I find that the nonprofit leaders that I get to work with have that in spades. I mean, they want to, because they have that passion for the mission, and they recognize that they could tighten up their leadership game. I'm more than willing to work with them, and to this day, it's enjoyable work, because they know that in the nonprofit space. I wrote this in the introduction to the missing piece for nonprofit leaders. One of the 7 books that I wrote. One of the very first lines is, nonprofit leadership is the toughest gig in the business. You're spending both sides of every nickel. You're using a lot of volunteers versus paid employees. People are there for the passion, not the money. And leading that is tough. And so if I can help support that, then I'm all about it.
Yeah. Well, plus outside of nonprofits, though, it gives you a lot of variety, right? And again, anybody with the attitude knows that they're good but want to be better. That gives you a nice variety for your client base as well.
Sure. So who's your best client? I say the ones that do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this idea, a lot of people listening to this podcast are leaders in mission-based organizations or nonprofit organizations. And you have this idea that there's a distinction between social enterprise and a traditional charitable agency. Why don't you go into that a little bit?
Sure. Because I think it's an important distinction here as we go into, as we continue to navigate the 21st century, and how that's so much different than the last. So a social enterprise is typically an organization that leads with their mission, and it says, okay, here's what we want to accomplish, our vision, our mission, our strategy. Here's what we want to accomplish. Where do we get the money? A traditional charitable agency is going to, and again, this is largely from the population of agencies that I've worked with, and just a broader body of research that says a traditional agency is going to say, okay, I know I've got grants from this foundation, that foundation, and I get so much money from individual giving. Here's what we're probably going to put in our budget. And so what can we do within that budget? And so that's a telltale sign. A telltale sign of a traditional agency is they do their budget and then they do their strategic plan. A social enterprise will do their strategic plan and then build a budget to support it. And so there was a report published in 2018 that said 1 out of every 7 community charitable agencies are insolvent. They just don't know it yet. And it comes from that idea that if you're simply operating within the realm of the left and right boundaries of the grants that you plan on getting for that particular year, plus some individual giving plus or minus, it's not a sustainable model, not in today's age. Gone are the days of what I call feel-good funding, of people just handing you a $25,000 check and to do whatever the heck you want to with it, right? People want more accountability with their money, and they want to know what it's going for. And so this idea of the social enterprise is one that I work with my clients, my nonprofit leaders, executive directors, CEOs, and in some cases even the board and the senior staff that report to the CEO. It's a way of thinking about how you run your business versus limiting yourself, self-limiting the possibilities by saying we'll work within what we think the grant and individual giving and the development process will give us on any particular fiscal year.
So it's safer, certainly that way, but it's also a non-growth oriented way of running that business, right? With the traditional
Exactly.
agency model, developing that budget first, and it's those budgets aren't always guaranteed, are they?
No, they're not. I mean, you have especially, one of the biggest sources of funding are foundations. I mean, that's true. But traditional foundations, and anybody that is getting that money knows that you may get 1 or 2 years, maybe 3, but then there's always that down year. So if you're getting $100,000 from a foundation and you've counted on that money for 2 years, and all of a sudden that third year you don't, how do you make up that deficit? I have several clients today that are now having to account for the fact that all the federal and state money from the pandemic has dried up. It is no more, but they've counted on that money. So, and we're not talking about PPP. We're talking about, money that's just funded programs and the like. So now they have to say, okay, we're not going to see that $250,000 anymore. How do we make up the delta? Do you serve less people, or do you double down and get your board more engaged in fundraising and the like? So,
and find the money, yeah,
and find the money somehow. So this idea of social enterprise, you're less likely to be boxed into that problem if you're always leading with, here's what we need to accomplish, where are we going to get the money?
Right. Definitely a growth oriented strategy for sure. And they, if they have a good board and good development person, then they're going to find the money from multiple sources. It's also a safer bet because your eggs aren't all coming from one. Or I should say your basket's not coming from one egg.
Right.
However that works.
Yeah. And I have literally going back to 2008 when I took over as the board president of Literacy to Page. At that time, 55% of our revenue came from one grant from the Secretary of State.
Oof. Man.
55. I mean, and that's a ridiculous model under any set of circumstances. And so basically the charge was, we went out and by necessity, we went out and said, okay, we need to look at every possible source of revenue that even remotely rhymes with literacy, right? Financial literacy, business literacy. I mean, we just went all out. And what we discovered was a lot more sources of revenue than we even thought possible. And yes, it was out of desperation, but it taught us a very powerful lesson to don't wait until your back's against the wall to start thinking differently about how you run your business.
Right.
And so that lesson to this day is front and center in my own mind is I'm helping other organizations think differently about how they run their business.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into that. I've heard you talk about nonprofit leaders should run their agency like a business.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Tell us a little bit more about that and being maybe more conscious of that business acumen.
Well, business acumen is, the short definition is basically knowing how money is made and applying that to your strategy, right? That's that alignment of knowing how to generate revenue. Nonprofits are a non-profit business. They're not a non-revenue business, right? So,
right.
There's still a revenue generating through the development process, through the fundraising process, et cetera. And so it's, I ask nonprofit leaders when they kind of push back a little bit and say, well, we're not run like a traditional business. I said, okay, so you have operations, you have a need for marketing. And of course, Paul Gregory Media is always right there.
Where's the bell? Ding.
You have people that you need to lead. You have processes that you need to manage. You have tools that you need to pay attention to, to leverage for economies of scale. And they, of course, they're answering yes to all of those questions. And said, then then you need to know how to lead in that environment and how to manage all that, how to bring all that together, because that's business acumen. It's great that you have the passion for the mission, but there have been cases where I've caught senior, and not caught in a gotcha sense, but just through the conversation as they're thinking through some of the decisions they make. They're very passionate about making a decision that affects 3 people, but leaves 23 people out in the cold. Instead of thinking broader about more business-like to say, wouldn't it be better if you serve 23 and maybe 3 get left out in the cold? I mean, you can't serve them all at one time. But it also brings up another point. I just had this conversation this morning with a prospect who it provides a service in the same area where some on the south side of Chicago, where some of my existing clients already provide services, complementary services. But it never occurred to the executive director to partner with somebody else, right? And so once again, leaders that think that they have to provide it all, do it all, are making a mistake without at least pursuing who can I partner with that might have complementary resources and get economies of scale for support.
Right.
And so that everybody wins, right? Your services get provided, but you're in cooperation with another agency that may be providing complementary services. I'll give you an example of how tight that can be held. I was working with a nonprofit agency that provided research into a particular disease. And one of the questions I asked the CEO was, the research for this disease is very similar to the research that this other disease is that they're doing. What if you partnered with the two organizations to get economies of scale and maybe find a cure for both much quicker?
Right.
The CEO looked at me like I just called their parents a dirty name or something. Just the blasphemy of even the suggestion.
So he didn't like your suggestion?
No. Not only did they not like it, they were very offended by it.
Or partner with another company, healthcare company that's doing the same, similar type of research.
Yeah. There was about a 60% crossover.
So that's a fierce competitive relationship then.
Well, it's my money, it's my research, right? And it's, at some point that not built here mindset is going to work against me. It simply will. The nonprofit space I believe is ripe for consolidation, at least partnerships. For instance, why are there 3 autism organizations in the same city?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and everybody's got their own marketing team. Everybody's got their own support team. Everybody's asking for the same dollars out of the same community. So what would happen if you formed a coalition and got better economies of scale from the fundraising process?
Yeah.
That's all that is. It's a long answer to say that's business acumen wired into your thinking process as leaders.
Yeah. I can't think of the name and it's escaping me because it's been a few years since I worked with them, but there is a consortium for pediatric brain cancer, actually, that, and I'll have this on the resources page, that has partners with hospitals and research teams all over the country to speed up that process of diagnosing and preventing and curing. And the difference in a sole organization doing the research and findings to what it is now is something staggering, like 3 to 4 times faster.
Oh, sure.
And getting the results benefit. And then sharing those results and giving other researchers access to the same tissue. And I'm so sorry to those people that I forgot the name. CBTTC is the acronym. Child tumor. Oh gosh, I'm embarrassed. I'll have it on the resources page for sure. Check it out below if you're on the YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube or on our website at paulgregorymedia.com. But Rick, you wanted to mention, and I think you wanted to plug Community Memorial Foundation, is it?
Yeah. So when we talk about leaders, I've had one of the ways that I've been able to fulfill my own personal mission in helping nonprofit leaders was I and two other women that were active coaches and active in the nonprofit community helped the Community Memorial Foundation put together an executive coaching program where the foundation would fund a year's worth of executive coaching for CEOs and executive directors within their funding area. And I think that's the kind of work that can normalize help the executive directors and CEOs and nonprofit leaders in general just really stay in the game in a much more effective way. Because without that, you've got leaders that are out there well-intended, kind of struggling to figure it out as they go and the like. And, with limited budgets and just the challenges that nonprofits face, I think it's great that Community Memorial has a program like that helps bring a coaching resource to these executive directors. Because let's face it, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, it's lonely at the top, right? I mean, you're the one and only, and sometimes it's great to be able to just thought partner with a coach without going to your board, without going to your staff. And I find that in my cadre of CEOs and executive directors that I have the pleasure of working with, that's their number one value is they get the thought partner. Now, just for example, I have a CEO of a nonprofit here in the area that I haven't spoken to in over a year. Called me last week and said, "Hey, can we talk?" Because he knows I'm a trusted resource. We've worked together before, and I don't need to work with him every month or every week. But when there's a strategic decision to be made, having somebody like me or any other executive coach out there to support you in those decisions just is it's almost priceless, because it just helps accelerate the success rate immeasurably.
Yep. There's definitely a benefit there. I almost call it like business therapy. Well, it's a sounding board. Sometimes you're going through a rough patch and you need that business therapy, and sometimes it's just what to do, but you're not prioritizing the time to do it, and sometimes you just need the accountability, right?
Exactly right.
So for those,
I had a client one time that just called me up and says, "Hey, I just need to argue with you for an hour."
Well, that's a first. Yeah. Well, I mean, you've been doing this for how long, Rick?
15 years.
15 years. Okay.
Yeah, this is our 15-year anniversary. So I think we're only one or two behind you in that regard. So
yeah, about two, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, for mission-based organizations, for-profit organizations, corporate organizations, nonprofits, if you want that sounding board, or that accountability, or that mind shift a little bit, maybe from a traditional agency to a social enterprise, so that you can grow your organization and what that might look like, and just some basic principles. And your book, you actually have a book for nonprofits, right?
I do. It's called The Missing Piece for Nonprofit Leaders. And, because I'm big on business alignment, I'm a systems thinker, and it's really predicated on the fact that all the moving parts have to work together.
Yeah.
And so, I believe that one came out in 2016, I believe, and it's written in the language of nonprofits. Speaks directly to membership organizations, speaks directly to raising funds, scaling the business, how to get the most out of your development, and grow your programs in a way that is sustainable.
Yeah, a lot of that centers around, I guess, that we used to call it BAM, but a business alignment
business alignment maturity model.
Model, yeah. Yeah, so definite systems, tried and true systems and processes and operations that are talked about in that book that are, I think, going to be very helpful for any business, really.
And then the most recent book, which was Finding the Missing Piece, was around one of the things I saw from the pandemic was how disjointed and quite frankly terrible leadership communications was during that pandemic, during 2020 in 2021. And it prompted me to write the book, Finding the Missing Piece. So it's really around, it dovetails on the missing piece for nonprofit leaders, but it speaks to how to effectively communicate at a strategic, operational, and a tactical level. Because communications really is the essence of sustainable success.
Right. Well, we'll be sure to put your website and even links to those 2 specific books on our resource page so that people can easily find it. Rick, thanks for joining us today. I think we've only covered the surface. I may want to have you back on again just to talk about some deeper topics.
I'd love to. Yeah, like I said, we've worked together in the past. Always a pleasure having a conversation with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Till next time, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Mission Matters podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.